Hi, everyone. My name's Neysa Jensen. I'm a member at Cathedral of the Rockies. We've been here for 30 years this summer. I've been involved mostly in the music program, so you've probably seen me playing flute or handbells or otherwise herding children around in choirs and things. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today on Mental Health Mondays is that I live with a mental illness, and I think it's sometimes important for us to talk about the hard things. For some people, it's an uncomfortable topic, but I think it's an important one. I think it's important for us to talk about mental illness as much as we talk about mental health. We all need to take care of our mental health. That's very true and very important. And people who have mental illness need a little extra care, just as if somebody who had a broken bone needs a little extra care. They need to take care of all their bones for sure, but the broken one needs extra attention and needs time to heal and to rest. So I think one of the reasons I have a strong urge to let people know about mental illness is because it's impacted my life so incredibly much, and probably most of yours as well. Statistically speaking, about 1 in 5 people live with a mental illness. That's the person with the mental illness, which means that probably most of us are impacted by it in some way. Either we have a family member, a coworker, a neighbor, a friend, somebody we know who lives with mental illness. And we will all have to deal with that. Maybe that person needs some extra accommodation in getting projects done, or maybe some extra accommodation in school. Lots of reasons that it impacts all of us. It also impacts all of us because it costs the U.S. money in our gross national product, which I know sometimes when we're talking about these personal things like this, it seems sort of callous to talk about it in terms of the overall economy. But for some people, that's where it hits them, and that's where they see that, okay, this is an important issue that we need to all address together, and not just those who actually live with the disease. So we have, the statistic I have here is that mental illnesses cost America $193.2 billion in lost earnings each year. And that's quite a hefty chunk of money. Other statistics I think are far more terrifying. For example, 40,000 American lives are lost to suicide every year. And we know that a large proportion of suicide deaths are in people who have mental illness. It's certainly not the majority, but it is a great percentage. So the more we can do to help those living with mental illness, the more we can do to help decrease our rate of suicide in our country. So one of the things I wanted to tell you about myself today is that I am a volunteer with NAMI. NAMI stands for National Alliance on Mental Illness, which is a national organization. It also has affiliates in every state, and those affiliates have branches throughout each state. I volunteer with NAMI Treasure Valley, which, as the name implies, serves all of the Treasure Valley, mostly all of southwestern Idaho. NAMI is an organization that is almost entirely run by volunteers. We teach classes for both people who live with mental illness as well as families and friends of those with mental illness, and parents who have children with mental illness. We also have support groups for all those groups of individuals. All of that is free. I know this isn't an ad for NAMI, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. If you're interested in hearing more about NAMI, you can either contact me directly, or you can go to our national website, which is NAMI.org, NAMI.org, or our local website, which is TVNAMI.org, TreasureValleyNAMI.org. So they both have a wealth of information. The local website will give you a calendar of all our classes and support groups, all of which are currently on Zoom in our current coronavirus world. So when it is safe and appropriate to do so, we will reopen those to meet in person. But for now, they're going just fine on Zoom, and everyone is getting served, which is a great thing. Thank goodness for technology. So today, the main thing I want to talk to you about is the warning signs of mental illness. A lot of us are not aware of what these warning signs might be. And sorry to stumble. I'm particularly I don't know what the word is. I embrace teenagers with mental illness, and the reason is because I was a teenager when I first had symptoms of mental illness. And I know the statistics tell us that 50% of everyone with a mental illness shows symptoms between the age of 14 and 18. And then that number goes up to 75% for youth 14 to 25. I was that age when I started having symptoms, but I didn't know that I had a mental illness. I thought I was a horrible person. I got a lot of remarks about how nasty I was to others and how obnoxious I was, and all kinds of other words that we don't need to repeat. And it was 20 years before I actually got treatment for my mental illness. And then since then, it's been another 20 years since I've been treated. And I want everyone to get treated well before they've been living with their mental illness for 20 years. It is a very hard way to live. The other thing about teenagers that frequently comes up is a lot of behaviors that we attribute to teenagers, just sort of normal teenager behavior, is often a sign of a mental illness, and that's sometimes why it goes untreated for such a long time. Statistically, most people do not get treated for 10 years. I went for 20, but most, the average is 10. So I think if we can get the information out there and help parents and teens themselves understand what some of these signs of mental illness are, then they can address it sooner and get treatment and live a full life in recovery. And we use that word recovery because there is no cure, there is no way to not have the mental illness, but you can be treated and you can be stable and you can be functional. And fortunately for me, that's where I am right now. Treatment has helped me greatly and been very successful. So I want to share with you some of the main symptoms of mental illness, and some of them will seem really obvious and we would associate that behavior with any form of mental illness. Some of them not so much. So I'm just going to go down our standard list, and some of them, if they're obvious, I might just leave it at that. Others I might sort of go a little deeper just to explain. So the first one is something we're all familiar with: feeling very sad or withdrawn for more than 2 weeks. People get really confused when I say this symptom because we've all been sad. We all feel withdrawn at times. Sometimes that's temporary. Sometimes it goes on for a while. Sometimes, for example, if you're grieving the loss of a family member, for example, that feeling of being sad and withdrawn might last for much longer than 2 weeks, but it doesn't mean you have a mental illness. It means you're grieving. So obviously you have to take into consideration the context of these symptoms and what's happening. I think it's most helpful to look at the symptoms overall in a person's life, your own or whoever you're thinking of that might be exhibiting these symptoms, and see, is this their normal behavior? Is this how they normally are? Or is this new and different and it doesn't seem like them? That's when it becomes something you should probably pay more attention to. The next one is trying to harm or end one's life or making plans to do so, and I think that's pretty obvious. Idaho has one of the highest suicide rates in the country, and I think we all need to really be a little bit more hyper vigilant about people we see. If somebody you know makes even a comment about suicide or about wishing to die or about making plans to die, that is something you should take seriously. It may not mean that they're actually planning to attempt a suicide, but it's better to be safe than sorry. And believe it or not, if you address someone directly about it, 9 times out of 10, they will be relieved. They want help. They may not know how to ask for it. Maybe these offhand comments about dying are a way to ask for it, but it will not give them any impetus to attempt suicide just by you bringing it up. Believe me, if they're thinking about it, it's already in their brain, and you're bringing it up is not going to make it any different. Okay, the next one is severe, out-of-control, risk-taking behaviors that cause harm to self or others. These can be as varied as driving under the influence, could be a risky behavior, having unprotected sex, taking drugs. Those are kind of obvious risk-taking behaviors. It might be getting into fights. It might be bullying someone even, which may not seem like a risk-taking behavior, but it might be a different and new behavior for that person that is out of character. Okay, the next symptom is sudden, overwhelming fear for no reason, sometimes with a racing heart, physical discomfort, or difficulty breathing. This might remind you of our common stereotype of a person having a panic attack, and that's kind of what that's referring to. Panic attacks can occur in people with all kinds of mental illnesses. It doesn't have to be particular to anxiety, which is usually what we associate it with. People without mental illness can have panic attacks too. It's much more common, though, to see regular panic attacks like that in people with mental illness. Another part of this symptom that I want to talk about is the physical discomfort. I don't know if you remember, a few years ago there were some television ads for antidepressants that talked about how depression hurts. And they seem a little cheesy, but actually that's true. There are many physical manifestations of mental illness that we often just sort of toss aside, and we don't associate that with mental illness because we're thinking mental, it's all in the head, it has nothing to do with our body, but that's not true. We are whole human beings, and everything is connected. So if you have an illness in one area, it often affects another. The next symptom is significant weight loss or gain, and obviously we think of eating disorders, which is generally what this symptom refers to, but it could also apply to other mental illnesses. For example, depression. A person with depression might lose their appetite and stop eating. They may have an increased appetite and eat excessively. So, and that applies to many other mental illnesses as well. So that's something to pay attention to. Again, out of the ordinary, not in character for that person. The next one is seeing, hearing, or believing things that aren't real. And this is commonly what we see when we're talking about somebody with schizophrenia. There are multiple places along a spectrum that could include having this disengagement from reality. So somebody who seems to be seeing things or hearing things that aren't there, that you can't see or hear, somebody who can't really grasp onto what's actually right in front of them, that's something definitely to pay attention to. The next one is excessive use of alcohol and drugs, which we sometimes forget can be associated with mental illness. And there are several reasons for that. One is that a person with untreated mental illness feels terrible, mentally and physically. They feel awful. And if they don't really even know they have a mental illness, or they haven't accepted it or tried to get treatment for it, they may try to self-medicate, through drugs and alcohol or other means, but drugs and alcohol are very common. They just want to feel better, and drugs and alcohol make them feel better, which often leads to an addiction disorder. So we call that a dual diagnosis, when a person has both a mental illness and an addiction disorder. And that's a double whammy for that person. That's just even more to overcome and more to deal with. So if you see somebody who doesn't typically engage in drug use or alcohol use, suddenly excessively using, it might be a sign that they're trying to self-medicate. On the other end of the spectrum, we have times when excessive drug use or alcohol use can sort of be the catalyst for the symptoms of mental illness to start. We've seen this in people with schizophrenia particularly. So that's something to pay attention to. And the next one is drastic changes in mood, behavior, personality, or sleeping habits. And I think that just is kind of a catch-all symptom spectrum there of, anytime you see somebody that you know who is not acting the way they normally act, their mood is different, they suddenly are sleeping a lot or not at all, or they just, they just are not themselves, that's a time to pay attention and maybe approach them and have a conversation and say, yeah, you don't seem yourself lately. Would you like to go have a cup of coffee and tell me about it? Or whatever your approach is. The next one is extreme difficulty concentrating or staying still. This is one we typically associate with things like ADHD, and that's a common stereotype of ADHD, but it can also apply, again, to almost any mental illness. So I'm just going to leave that there. If somebody is just not being able to concentrate or sit still, and it could be not even be sitting still, it could be needing to do something with their hands all the time, doodling or fidgeting or chewing their nails, all kinds of things can be included in that one. And then the last one that we have is intense worries or fears that get in the way of daily activities. And this sounds a lot like what we would associate with anxiety, but as I said before, in all of these, it can apply to a lot of other mental illnesses as well. The key words here are intense worries and fears. We all have worries and fears, obviously, but these are intense and they get in the way of daily activities. So if you think about somebody with an anxiety disorder, they might feel paralyzed by those fears and worries. They might not be able to function. They might be just basically stopped in their tracks and not be able to go on from that point. So it's not quite a panic attack as with the overwhelming fear and difficulty breathing and stuff, but it's more of an underlying, every little decision brings intense worry and fear, and it's hard to function that way. So those are kind of our general mental illness symptoms, and I wanted you to know those and be aware of them. If you're experiencing them, or somebody you're around or who is in your family is experiencing these, what do you do? There are a lot of ways to approach this. If it's you and you feel comfortable with a friend or a family member, talk to them. Say, I'm not feeling myself. I'm just so depressed. I can't even function. Describe how it feels. Depression, major depressive disorder, is my mental illness. And before I got treated, I was describing it as, I feel like I'm in a deep, dark pit, and I'm trying to claw my way out, and I can't. And no matter what I do, there's no way I'm getting out of this deep, dark pit. Nobody can reach me. I'm here alone. So if you're experiencing things, try to describe them to somebody that you trust. And if you're somebody that has been confided in, work with your family member, loved one, friend to to get help. That can mean a visit to the doctor. It could mean an appointment with a counselor. It could mean talking to somebody on staff at church or one of the clergy. There are many places to start. I recommend start anywhere. Start wherever it feels appropriate. It's important to start the conversation and move on from there. As I said, many mental illnesses can have physical symptoms, so sometimes a visit to the doctor is a good idea for a starter. You can tell them what you're experiencing. They will have referrals for you. They could also do some testing to make sure that your blood levels of certain vitamins and hormones are all balanced, because that can impact your disease as well. People have different needs and different styles. Even within one, diagnosable mental illness condition, what works for one person might not work for another person. Some people do great with talk therapy, other people hate it. Some people like group support, and other people hate that. Some people need meds, and that's great if that's their approach. Other people just can't tolerate meds and have horrible side effects from all the different meds they've been put on, and they would rather just not be on meds. So it's a journey. It is not something that gets taken care of in one doctor's visit or one counselor's visit. If you want to know more about different people's experience, we can share that sometime as well. So that is what I wanted to talk to you about today. Next time on the video I do, we're going to talk about stigma. This is the main reason I think people don't get treatment, is because they're ashamed. They feel like if everyone knew about it, they'd be shunned, or they wouldn't be included, or they'd be treated differently, or they'd get fired, or who knows what. So I think part of my goal in working with NAMI is to try to eliminate the stigma around mental illness, and that is mostly by talking about it. But there are a lot of other tools we can add to that to make sure we're not adding to the stigma and we're actually helping to remove it. So I hope that is helpful to you today. And like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me personally, or go to tvnami.org. We have a way to contact us there. If you go to nami.org, the national website, there are some chat rooms there. You can talk about issues with other people who are dealing with those. Reach out in any way that you can and get help. And that's all I have for you today. I'm sorry to not have happy news, except that there's this. I like to tell people that I live with a mental illness. I don't struggle with it. I don't fight my mental illness. I have a mental illness, and it's there. I've actually kind of learned to make friends with it, because it's taught me a lot about myself, my family, how to treat people, how to be caring and compassionate to others. It's wonderful things, and I'm actually thankful for it. Not that I wish a mental illness on anybody, but I think if we approach it from that point of view, that what we are given in life we can deal with, and we can learn and grow from that, I think that makes all the difference. So thanks for listening, and have a great day, and please feel free to reach out to me if there's any way I can help you deal with mental illness in your life. Thanks.